Hi, I'm Kath, and this is my crisis. We have a cat right here who is close to causing havoc. I'm on 10 minutes of recording, Jesus Christ. I'm just doing a little bit of painting, and I thought I would talk to you about the books that I read this month. In February of 2022, shortest month of the year, I read 7 books. So I'm pretty impressed with that, actually, because I went from not having any attention span last year to reading 8 books in January and now 7 books in February. So yay me. I'd still like to read more, but it's a really good start. And I actually DNF'd 2 books this month as well, but I'm not counting them. I'm going to be putting the covers up here just because most of these were ebooks that I got from the library, so it's easier to just pop them in there. First book I read was The Push by Ashley Audrain. In case you haven't heard what it's about, it is about a woman who is about to have her first baby, and she is both very nervous and very hopeful about it because in her family there's like a history of really difficult mother-daughter relationships, and so she's kind of apprehensive, but she's hopeful that she can get past it. She wants to be like a really great mother to make up for the difficult time that she had as a child. And so her husband is like, you know, he's going to be a great dad. He comes from a really close-knit family. He doesn't really understand most of her concerns because it's like so far removed from his experience. And then she has the baby, and she tries really hard to connect with this baby, but it's like almost from the moment of birth, this baby wants nothing to do with her. It's like rejecting her. And she, you know, isn't 100% sure if it's like this vibe between them is coming from her, like she's trying too hard, or she doesn't know how to be a proper mother, or she doesn't have like this innate warmth, or if it's, you know, coming from the baby, like what kind of baby doesn't react well to its mom. Like it's just really weird. And as the child grows up, this little girl, this just goes on. Like there's just something between them that just isn't right, that she can't quite pinpoint. And the dad is sort of very dismissive of all of her concerns. Like if there's something that the daughter does that just doesn't seem quite right, you know, he'll like find a way to explain it away. You know, he's always saying like, oh, you're so hard on her. But like there's something weird about their kid, or you know, she doesn't quite trust like her perception of things as well. She's always questioning herself, and you're seeing it from like her point of view in first person, and she's writing this book. A lot of it is taking place or is stated in second person. So she's actually writing it as like a letter to this husband, like to the father of this daughter. So it's quite interesting because it's almost like accusatory in some ways, because it's like, you said this and I saw this, but you said it was this. I would strongly suggest, trigger warning, that anybody who has a child, you know, think very carefully about reading this book, especially if you have a young child, or like if you're the kind of person that gets like really, really upset watching like a TV show where a little kid is playing near a pool. I would stay away from this book, because bad things will happen to children. I loved this book. It's my #1 book of the month, which, like, spoiler alert, oops, you know, I'm giving it all away in the first 5 minutes, but it was my #1 book of the month. It was fantastic, so well written, and just like this really interesting character study. I also don't think, I know a lot of people have said like, oh, you know, they were expecting it to be more of a traditional thriller. It's more of a psychological horror almost, with a few thriller elements, especially near the end. And in fact, like what I would say as I was reading it, I felt like, oh, this is a 5-star book. Like 3/4 of the book, the first 3/4, I was like, this is amazing. Like, it's so different from anything I've ever read, and I really like it. And then sort of near the end is when it got a little bit closer in sort of tone and story to what I would consider a more traditional thriller. Like, it had some familiar tropes that you see maybe in other thrillers. And because of that, I was like a little bit less excited about the last quarter of the book. But, you know, overall, I still give it 5 stars. It was fantastic. Hello, Cat. People We Meet on Vacation is a book about Poppy and Alex, a girl and a guy who are best friends and have been since college. And every year they go on a vacation together, just the two of them. And it's like their yearly tradition. But a couple years ago, something happened during this yearly tradition that drove a wedge between them, and they have not done it since. And the story of the book sort of starts when Poppy realizes that she really misses her friendship with Alex and misses those vacations, and she you know, is craving that. And so she decides to get in touch with him and organize something so that they can see each other. I really liked this book. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. I actually only rated it 3 stars, but that's because I'm not super drawn to kind of like fluffier, romancier books. This was a really good one, but like just by its nature, I feel like it wasn't necessarily for me. I did appreciate that the writing was good. I liked how well developed the characters were. I also really liked how we kind of, like, we get to go back and see all their past vacations, and we get to go back and see how they met. And I really enjoyed seeing how they met and kind of, how different they are and how they like first became friends. I really liked seeing that, you know, this relationship sort of, because they're so different, it frees them up to really be themselves around each other, and I like that a lot. Something that I hadn't really thought of, except in This Is Black, I Want on Purple. As a friends to lovers story, this was very well done. Honestly, like after the push, it was a nice break, but the reason why I'm giving it only 3 stars is because I feel like in another month I won't even remember what it was about. Cat. The next book that I read was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. I read it for the Literally Dead Book Club, which is Kayla's book club, Books and Lala on YouTube, and I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I found her book club because I already had this on my radar, and I also had the March book on my radar. Oh my god, my painting is covered in cat hair. So I thought, oh, well, I might as well join this because I'm going to read these anyway, and now I have people to discuss them with. So I did that, and I'm really glad I did because I really enjoyed this book. It is about these 2 men, Ike and Buddy Lee, both ex-cons. One is black and one is white. And their sons are married to each other. At the very beginning of the book, their sons are brutally murdered in an attack. And this is like, it's not a spoiler, it's literally like before the book even starts. And Ike and Buddy Lee don't even really know each other, like, because they were so not a part of their sons' lives because they had, you know, trouble accepting that their sons were gay. They, you know, they kind of meet for the first time after their sons have been killed, and they, when it seems like the police have sort of given up the chase, You know, they've like run out of leads and they don't know where to turn next, and they kind of decide that the trail is run cold. These two guys decide that they are going to sort of return to their old criminal ways and find their son's killer or killers, you know, using maybe some vigilante justice kind of methods. The dialogue was really poppy. It felt like an action movie. Honestly, like, I think people who were hoping for it to be like a thriller with like a mystery at the core of it are probably really disappointed, because honestly, any twists and turns that were in this book were like really easily guessed from a mile away. You know, when you're like, well, who could the killer be? And then you just kind of do an inventory of like, who are the characters that we know, and it becomes very obvious who the killer is just by like default of there being, you know, 6 characters. And anyway, but yeah, I don't think that that was really the point. It wasn't so much a mystery to me as it was kind of almost like a crime action buddy movie. Like, it reminded me a lot of like stuff like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or I can't think of any other ones right now, but just like, you know, it was almost like an exploitation film because it was very violent. And it did sort of have a little bit of an issue with, like, I don't say preachiness. It's not so much that it was preachy. Just the dealing with like the gay subject matter, LGBTQ subject matter. It was a little bit clumsy at times. Like the two dads are sort of dealing with their guilt over not having accepted their sons, but they're also still, you know, homophobic in certain ways. And like, yeah, you don't get over homophobia overnight, but at the same time, like the way that they think about homophobia and the way that the book will kind of devolve into generic statements about homophobia, just felt a little bit clumsy. Like, you know, it could have been a little more personal, or I don't know, done a little bit better. It kind of took me out of the book when that would happen, but you know, just the fact that it was making an effort and the characters were making an effort, I'm willing to forgive a lot of that kind of clumsiness. And I feel like, you know, maybe their attitude about their son's sexuality doesn't feel earned, but their friendship does. And I think that was more important to me, just based on like what I'm seeing in the book. I wanted them to be friends and to kind of accept each other. Yeah, I really liked it. I actually gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. Next, I read Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This was just my second Grady Hendrix book. I have only ever read My Best Friend's Exorcism before this, and I read My Best Friend's Exorcism way back when it first came out, so like many years ago. And I didn't have high hopes for Horror Store because of it. Because when I read My Best Friend's Exorcism, I did enjoy it at the time, but it was a little bit like how I feel about romance books sometimes, which was that, you know, I actually felt like it was a little surfacey, a little bit impermanent, like it wasn't going to stick with me. It didn't do damage, you know, it didn't punch me, it didn't like change my life. It had felt fluffy and surfacey to me. So I didn't have like a whole lot of hope for Horror Store, but I liked the synopsis and the cover, so that's why I gave it a shot. And also just like, you know, when you see stuff that's available at the library, you kind of go nuts and hold a bunch of stuff or borrow a bunch of stuff because it's available. Well, our main character is a girl named Amy, and Amy works at a store called Orsk, sorry, just Orsk. She works at a store called Orsk, which is a fictional IKEA ripoff. It's a North American chain that Grady Hendrix made up that is an IKEA clone. And the way he describes it is exactly like IKEA, so just like picture an IKEA. And Amy works there and she hates her job. She's like a real, I don't know, like sort of a slacker. She really needs her job. She sort of resents how much she needs her job. Having been in retail, I related hardcore to Amy. I spent a long time in retail. I spent a long time trying to avoid unnecessary responsibility in retail and then having it foisted upon me anyway. So I really understand what she's going through. The book takes place on one day and night, I guess, where the store has been finding finding things disturbed when they open it in the morning. Like the associates come in and they open the store in the morning. They've been finding that, you know, some things have been damaged, some things have been disturbed. On the morning where we join our heroine, a couch has been horribly fouled overnight. And so a manager approaches Amy and another coworker and asks her to come back that night for a kind of stakeout sort of situation where he and she and the other associate are going to try to catch whatever's damaging things in their store, because they have some like head honchos coming in and they need to make sure everything's perfect the next day. So they stay and they sort of start monitoring things, you know, around the store after close, and that's when stuff starts to go down, and it is bananas. It's so dark. I loved it. It sort of has this cutesy tone, because it's using all of this like IKEA imagery and the foreign cutesy sounding names. Like at the start of every chapter is named after a product, and you get like an illustration of the product. And as the book goes on, the products get, you know, a little bit weirder, but it never stops doing that. So it's a little bit like flippant. It could come across as flippant or like, you know, uneven in tone, but I actually really liked it. I felt that like the continued use of that and the continued kind of tone, was actually super interesting, because it just made things that should be innocent sound sinister. Oh, another thing about Horrorstore that I thought I had as I was reading it was, or especially at the end, was that it almost feels like it warrants a sequel. It had a little bit of a feel of like the darkest parts of John Dies at the End in those books, which I actually really like. Maybe I just kind of like things that seem a little bit flippant or have like a weird tone. That was weird. And next I read the 2021 Griffin Poetry Prize Anthology. This is part of my effort of getting reacquainted with current, you know, poetry authors and poetry trends, and I really enjoyed it. I say that a lot, apparently. I really enjoy everything. So this, the Griffin Poetry Prize Anthology is an anthology that kind of collects the books that are on the shortlist for the Griffin Poetry Prize, which is a pretty prestigious poetry prize. It's a Canadian prize, but they have an international prize and a Canadian prize. So they give like one of the prizes away to someone not from Canada, and then the other prize to someone from Canada. And in the 2021 shortlist, the authors were, I have them written down because I don't remember all of them, Victoria Chang, who wrote a book called Obit. So all the poems are like a selection from a specific book. So yeah, Victoria Chang, excuse me, no, I'm painting, do not push my hand, thank you. Valgina Mort, who wrote a book called Music for the Dead and Resurrected. Srikanth Reddy, who wrote a book called Underworld Lit. Yi Lei, who was a Chinese author who was translated by Tracy Smith and Cheng Tai Bi, who wrote a book called My Name Will Grow Wide Like a Tree. And those are the all of the international names. And then for the Canadian names, there was Joseph Dandurand, who wrote The East Side of It All, Canisia Lubrin, who wrote a book called The Dysgraphist, and Yusuf Sadi, who wrote a book called Pluviophile. And each of these excerpts were about like 5 or 6 poems from those books. It led to me buying Obit by Victoria Chang, actually. I was in love with Obit. I thought the ideas were so good, and the poems were really accessible, but also like the most emotional poems in the entire thing for me, because they're about, I guess, something that I think a lot about, which is like, they were about death, but not just like physical death, but like the death of certain ideas, or the deaths of certain aspects of yourself, or certain aspects of people you love. I really felt like there was something for everybody in this collection. And if you're looking for, you know, to get an idea of kind of like what's going on in poetry without committing to a whole book, which can be quite daunting, I would highly recommend these kinds of anthologies, because it's like, hey, these are the best of the best, you know, or the best of the year, or even like the best among this book. So you don't have to wade through a whole book to find like the gem that you might relate to. You'll probably find it in this kind of collection. The Valgina Mort poems, you're gonna hear more about those in a minute. They were so vivid that I actually like screamed after each one. It was a really weird moment, because after I was done, I couldn't remember exactly what they were about, but just like they punched me in the face, you know? It was pretty cool. Yeah, some of the other ones were really surreal. Srikanth Reddy's poems were like so surreal, I don't even know where to start. They were very weird. And, you know, I might want to revisit them in like 5 years and see if I get anything from them then, because they were very hard for me to access now. Incredibly surreal. The ones by Joseph Dandurand were super gritty, really dark and sad. They were like about, you know, like about the homeless, about sex workers and drug addicts, and it was quite a travel that he took me on. And then some of them were like really experimental. The Canisia Lubrin book is one that I think was like the least accessible in the entire collection. It was very experimental, or it seemed like it was to me. And yet I am fairly sure I'm going to be reading it like sometime soon, because I can't get it out of my head. It was really good. Just really strange, like poems about their own language, you know. I really enjoyed that. I want to read her book, but I'm scared that I won't understand it, basically. But 5 stars. I mean, like, reading an anthology, you can't go wrong. It's the best of the best. Because I enjoyed that so much, I went ahead and read Valgina Mort's Music for the Dead and Resurrected. I read the whole book. Valgina Mort is a poet from Belarus, which is kind of interesting, because I don't know very much about Belarus, but I mean, I'm learning about Belarus now because of the situation in the Ukraine and the fact that Belarus is involved in kind of the wrong side, you know? Her poems are really interesting because they're so personal, but they are linked together with these sort of shared images and shared phrases that, of course, kind of repeat, shared ideas. And as you kind of make your way through the book, these things kind of come back and echo in different ways. So even though like most of the poems are really personal, you get like a almost like a public echo, like a statement about her people, you know. The punching, I mean, it comes from the way that she chooses her language. Her words are incredibly precise, really well chosen, and just like incredibly brave. Like they feel like they're coming from a place that is beyond caring what anybody thinks, beyond giving any fucks, beyond like worrying about judgment. I don't know how to really explain that, but language is such a weird thing, and it's a little bit funny because I know that I have a lot of verbal tics that betray my lack of confidence, which is unfortunate, because that's not how I want to speak, but it's also not how I write. I mean, that's not true. If I was just like writing a random email, I probably would leave those in. But when editing, I'm really looking for those words that don't add anything, or words that are vague, and, you know, trying to refine them into the exact word that you want, or taking 3 words and being able to replace them with 1 word that's more powerful. And I just feel like, you know, she had a really good editor, or she's able to edit herself incredibly well, because her poems just hit. They just like hit. I gave the book 4 stars as a whole, just because while, you know, most of the poems that I read were good and powerful like that, they are obviously you know, most of the ones that I felt were the best or the most effective were the ones that I had already read in the anthology. So that's why I didn't give it like a 5, just because, you know, it wasn't like that level of just like that level of intensity all the way through. So last but not least is The Deep by Nick Cutter. Not The Deep by Solomon Rivers, or Rivers Solomon, or the other one. There's so many of The Deeps. But this one is by Nick Cutter, the author of The Troop. And it is, or it was described before I read it. I read a description that said it was like The Abyss meets The Shining. And now that I have read it, I have to say that is an incredibly apt description. There's almost like not a story, it's more of a premise than a story. The premise is that a small town vet, is called to an undersea scientific research station, which is in the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, basically the bottom of the earth. It's at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So it is 8 miles straight down in the water. And the reason that he's called there, just being like a regular old small town vet, is that his brother, who is like a big time scientist, has requested his presence. And this is really weird because they are not close at all. And the brother is down there because he's doing very important research, trying to find a cure to this disease that's devastating humanity, which is almost like Alzheimer's, like, but it can strike anyone at any age at any time. And they call it the gets because you just gradually forget everything. Like, it can happen to little kids, it can happen to anyone. The writing in this book was so good because you just feel the pressure. Like, as you're reading it, you really feel like the pressure of 8 miles of ocean on top of you, and the just like insane darkness, like just like complete and total unimaginable darkness at the bottom of that. The comparison to The Abyss is pretty obvious because, you know, we're underwater at the bottom of the ocean. There's something in the ocean. It's some sort of creature or advanced technology. You know, it's alien, and we're studying it. We're trying to figure it out. In terms of The Shining, you know, it would be easy to think, okay, you know, the isolation component is obviously the reference to The Shining, or the element that is shining like. And yeah, you know, there is some isolation, but that's not exactly, I don't think, what's driving the comparison. I always thought that The Shining was one of 3 books that Stephen King wrote that were really like part of a trilogy almost, where he's sort of working out different anxieties about being a parent. And The Shining would be the first one, and then Pet Sematary obviously dealing with like the death of your child, and then Cujo, dealing with like being unable to protect your child from a very real and present and aggressive danger. But The Shining is about you being a danger to your child, and just sort of the like anxiety over fatherhood. And this book involves fatherhood in a really interesting way. Really interesting. This book involves fatherhood. Like, your main character is a dad, and something has happened with regards to his son, and he is still not over that thing happening, and being down there just brings all of your your worst or most vivid memories into like really sharp focus. And so there's a lot of sort of, is this really happening? Am I going crazy? And a lot of stuff having to do with his son. And I really enjoyed those parts of the book. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely full of just madness. Super dark. And I also feel like it has a little bit of Japanese horror films as an influence, almost, because it's got that mood or that tone that, I mean, I've seen in some Japanese horror films from the early 2000s, when Japanese horror started really breaking through in America. This sort of like hopelessness, this like permeating dread and hopelessness that is attached to a place or a person, where like, if you go to that place, like, that's it. That place is gonna mess you up for life. Like, you're done. Your life is over. And what you're watching is the spiral downward, not like some American hero fighting evil. You're watching the descent. You're watching the spiral into madness, or into hell, or into suffering or death or evil. Yeah, it's very dark, and I enjoyed it a lot. I gave it 4 stars. I'm hoping to read The Troop soon, and his other book, Little Heaven, which I own, and we'll see how I feel. One thing I will say about his writing, although it was very evocative, and I felt, I really felt the pressure and the darkness, and he was really able to like make me feel physical experiences along with the characters. He has this weird way of choosing alternative words. And like, so what I mean is, like, he's sort of using the wrong word for certain things, and it was really bugging me. Like, instead of saying inexplicable, he would say unexplainable. And I kind of understand that unexplainable is a word, and like, you can obviously guess what it means, but to me, like, the correct word is inexplicable. Or like, he would say, he was using the word overalls instead of coveralls. So like, he was talking about somebody removing their overalls, but he was clearly meaning coveralls, because like, they were then topless. Like, nobody's wearing just overalls with no shirt underneath, but coveralls, yes, just like weird little things like that. Or maybe he could have used an editor. I don't know. I'm like, this is a published book. Somebody should have been editing it, but whatever. Anyway, so that was what I read in February. I hope you enjoyed it. This is my very poor and cat-interrupted interpretation of the cover of The Push, which I painted while we were speaking, and while my cat was harassing me to the ends of the earth. And if you would like, I will also give you a glimpse, although I don't know how much you're going to get out of this, because my handwriting, I am told, is very bulbous and atrocious and difficult to read. But here is my reading stats page for February. And a cat again. Deco. If all you hear is purring, I apologize. I will lock him in a cage next time I do this. He's a very sweet boy. He loves me so damn much. And I punish him for it on a regular basis. I feel so guilty. He's such a good boy. So that's what I read in February. Hopefully you saw me for most of that video and not the back of a cat's head or the light coming through his dumb ear. Thank you for joining me in the Crisis Cafe. I'm Kath again. And please don't hesitate to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, ask me any questions. You know, I'm taking applications to take this demon cat off my hands. No, I'm not. He's staying. He's the best. But anyway, hope you have a great week and I'll see you soon. Bye. Oh my God, you guys, you are making so much goddamn noise.